Well, now we are joined by Barbara Wein. Since 1981, Barbara has worked to stop human rights abuses, violence, and war. She has protected civilians from death squads and conflict zones, led 8 nonprofit organizations, taught alternatives to war and violence in 6 universities, and delivered peace seminars in 58 countries. She is the author of 22 articles, study guides, and books, including Peace and World Order Studies, a pioneering curriculum guide for university professors, which sold over 10,000 copies and is now in its 7th edition. She has won 4 awards from foundations and academic societies for political courage and leadership. She is named in Amy Goodman's book, Exceptions to the Rulers, and in the Progressive magazine for speaking truth to power. Her media appearances include The Washington Post, NBC Nightly News, Australian Public Broadcasting, Nuclear Times Magazine, The Harold Sanders Show, and radio interviews in India, Uganda, Zambia, Palestine, Israel, and Australia. Her areas of expertise are civic engagement, grassroots nonviolent movements, and gender equity. Barbara, welcome.
Thank you all. I wish to speak to the women of Iraq, to share with you the pain that you endured during the U.S. invasion, our aerial bombardments, and all the years subsequent to our illegal war. My daughter was born the morning of the invasion and the week that the Israelis crushed Rachel Corrie to death in Israel, Palestine. These events are not unrelated. Both are illegal occupations, and the women and children suffer disproportionately. But I want the people of Iraq to know that millions of us resisted, millions of us marched, testified, organized, broadcast, taught, were arrested and jailed to try to stop Bush and Cheney's illegal wars. Many of us attempted to disrupt the testimony of the war planners in the House Armed Services Committees, and we taught many, many teach-ins and workshops across the nation and across the world. Please know, if you don't know, that 36 million of us marched in 10 countries to try and stop the war. So there were big movements, campaigns, and strategies to try to prevent massive casualties. We do know that the women of Iraq knew that the aerial bombardment was coming. As was reported in the New York Times and the Washington Post, they went to the hospitals to get induced so that they would not have to bear their children in the midst of war. They went in advance of their due dates and were chemically induced because they knew shock and awe were coming. I felt spiritually, psychologically, mentally, and emotionally connected to those women across time and space, across consciousness. As I gave birth to my daughter in that labor and delivery room, I could not stop thinking about the women of Iraq having to give birth under US bombs raining down on them throughout that land. We know from the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, a Nobel Prize-winning group, that 1.3 million people have died from the US war in Iraq. Medical professionals now assume that over 2 million people will most likely die as a result of the war. From a lack of clean water, a lack of medicine, from all the electrical grids we knocked out, and from so many other impacts of war. This cannot be permitted as a new regime comes to power in the United States and I might add illegally again, as we saw the Bush-Cheney regime come to power. These are toxic, masculine, alpha war fighters, militarists, and hawks. They once again intend to rearrange the map of the Middle East. We will not permit that. We will not make the same mistakes we made during the US invasion. We will attempt to lay out grand strategy and build mass coalitions to prevent Trump and his generals from once again going to war in the Middle East. The soldiers who serve in the war now sit in my classrooms in peace studies at American University. They've returned from Iraq and Afghanistan, and they said, "You want to know how ISIS was created? We'll tell you how ISIS was created. We rounded up 15,000 Sunni men and put them in barbed wire camps out in the Iraqi desert, where they threw themselves against the barbed wire, bloodying themselves, saying, 'We've done nothing wrong.' We humiliated them, then we dragged them off to Abu Ghraib and we tortured them." That's where ISIS was born, inside the prisons where they did the planning. These are US soldiers coming back from war zones and teaching my students at American University the origins of one of the fiercest fighting forces we've now gone up against. And even President Obama has admitted our invasion gave rise to ISIS. We're not going to let the toxic alpha males do this again. We're not going to let them rain bombs down on innocent women and children. We will do everything to resist through boycotts, national strikes, organizing, getting arrested, marches, protests, articles, op-eds. I want the people of Iraq to know there are millions of Americans who are trying to resist militarism, and we are with you across time and space. We are connected to you. And I want to thank those who organized this tribunal, because the war is still going on for the Iraqis. They are still suffering enormously. We have collective amnesia, and we are ahistorical in the US, and we have forgotten the terror that we rained down on other populations. We cannot allow that to go forward. This tribunal is one of the most valuable things we can do in documenting and chronicling what was an illegal war, so we could never, never do it again. Thank you.